I'd like to welcome everyone back to another episode of our podcast. Today, we have Julia joining us, and we're going to be talking about rethinking healthcare in 2025, a fresh approach to the challenges with patient care. Julia, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and I will give you the floor to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you for having me on this podcast. My background is not healthcare, it's AI. I've been AI for over a quarter of a century and have 10 patents and more coming. But it was this opportunity to work with people who do make a difference and who work in healthcare, which actually was one of the biggest positive drivers for me to co-found this company. The company is called Glendor, and we've been around for 8 years, and we're trying to solve this big piece of a puzzle, which is for AI in healthcare, how to get access to data, because without data, it won't be successful. So thank you for having me.
Appreciate you coming. So, I guess we'll just jump right into our topic initially. So, I know since you are serving healthcare, we know healthcare is rapidly evolving. And as you mentioned, especially with AI and the data driven tools that are now being used. But can you tell us from your perspective, how is the technology reshaping patient care and what challenges do you see organizations facing when trying to adopt these innovations securely and responsibly?
Couple of things to think about, and it's actually both for patients and for providers. One of them is, unfortunately, we're running out of doctors, so we will have to have certain tools. And AI in healthcare is a promising direction. But at the same time, when we're looking at AI consists of three things. One of them is a model. And right now, LLMs are on the forefront of all those models. The other is the servers that it's trained on, and that's why NVIDIA and others are so successful because their computing power is very much needed. And the third, most important, is data. What data was the model trained on? And we're all familiar with ChatGPT. What we forget quite often is that it's trained on publicly available data, so they have access to billions of points. For AI in healthcare, situation is much more dire because this is not just some bits and bytes. It's somebody's very private, very personal records. It's very important to protect patients' privacy. But once the models do have access to this information, and if they have the access to highly diverse information, then they can be applied in various hospitals. And for hospitals, one of the things about AI in healthcare, which is very important, is to figure out the performance of those models, right? Whether or not they will work on their population.
Well, I want to ask actually a quick follow up because I know right now, like AI is the it thing in technology, but kind of knowing where things will eventually be heading because there's been a little bit around the quantum computing, and I don't know if y'all have seen anything as to the potential down the road how that may impact the use of AI compared to how it works today.
Well, one of the interesting things about AI, it comes up, it comes down in terms of popularity. And I'm concerned that there's sort of overpromise of AI, and people are starting to be concerned about the results because they don't match what they had in mind when they thought that they will be using AI. So that's one of my big concerns. That's why it's very important to make those models or AI approaches generalizable and workable for people who are actually using them.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So now I kind of want to get more into a little bit more about your business so people can have a better understanding about what y'all do and your mission. So I know from doing some research on your company that y'all focus on the automatic de-identification of multimodal medical data. Can you explain how your PHI sanitizer technology works and what makes it different from the more traditional manual or API based solutions?
Well, it's not manual, it's full automatic. It's not an API, meaning that the data is not shared with third party for processing. It's all done on the data custodian site, and that's actually much more secure because there's no additional exposure of data before it's processed. And it also works at scale, meaning you can do millions of, let's say, DICOMs, so millions of PDF pages successfully. So that's what sets us apart. But why would we even work on this? Because, in our opinion, what we're doing is the key to the success of AI in healthcare. Because, as we just discussed, AI is as good as the data it's trained on. And without ability to cleanse the data from private information so that the patient's identity is not exposed, then we actually make it possible for AI companies and researchers to have access to the data quicker and easier.
And so I know we've touched on this about the data privacy. We know it's being a critical issue. And so how do you see Glendor's approach in helping like hospitals, labs, pharmaceutical companies balance innovation with patient privacy and compliance requirements?
Ha- Patients' privacy has to be preserved, and that's good news for all of us. We're all patients, and we all know how important it is to preserve our privacy. There is a reason for it because if we look at the dark web research, Social Security is 50 cents, medical record is $250 per person. Those things are valuable for the wrong people, and it's very important to preserve this privacy. And that's what we focus on, how to make it so that hospitals can feel safe sharing the data while protecting patients' privacy.
And so I know we talk about the hospitals, and I know you've mentioned them a few times. Now, is this technology right now geared more towards like the larger entities such as the hospitals, or what about the smaller, more independent medical practices that are looking to that maybe are doing their own research and want to share and publish data? Is this accessible to them as well?
Yeah, it's both. But what I would encourage also for patients to think about what's happening with their data. Because we, as patients, need to make sure that we preserve our privacy, but also that people like us are represented in those in those models, so those models can actually work on us.
Okay, perfect. And so I know you've worked with a lot of major organizations like NIH and large hospital networks. What have been some of the biggest lessons or surprises you've seen when helping these groups strengthen their data privacy practices?
Good question. Surprises, maybe not, but what I find is twofold. It's very challenging to work with highly distributed teams because everybody has their own opinions. At the same time, it's extremely rewarding and much more powerful if the teams work together. And so that it's not just one organization, but a group of organizations. And that's what I like about some of the initiatives, for example, government initiatives, where the work of larger and small organizations is encouraged.
Thank you for that. So I want to move on to a little bit more about yourself and a little more of a personal insight so people understand who the person is but behind this. So you've been deeply involved with AI for quite some time. What is it that you enjoy most about leading Glendor and contributing to this intersection of healthcare, technology, and patient privacy?
This opportunity to work with quite a few different players and different people who contribute so much to our healthcare system. So that's my that I enjoyed very much this opportunity.
And do you have any new initiatives, projects, or collaborations at Glendor right now that you're focusing on that you might be particularly excited about?
Yes, every project is very exciting. A lot of them are not necessarily something I can talk about, but that's highly enjoyable because every customer presents its own challenges and also its own rewards in seeing how this works and how it can change things.
I think that's phenomenal to hear. And with all the work that you're currently doing around the data protection, how do you currently approach cybersecurity within your own organization, especially when handling sensitive data during development or client integrations?
And that's where that's a very good question, and that's where our approach comes in. We never see customers' data, and we strongly believe that we shouldn't. That anything which is like de-identification should be done on customer side. It could be in the cloud, it could be in the basement with air-gapped computer, no internet, but all of this has to be done by the client, by the data custodian. So in a sense, we ourselves are never exposed to anybody else's data, and would like to keep it that way.
I love that approach. Just as a follow up, because I'm kind of personally curious, and I assume even like maybe during development and testing, you maybe have had like a quote unquote dummy set of data so it could kind of train and learn what to recognize. And then what about when you first would roll out to a client? Is there ever a period where maybe the software needs to go through a learning period, or is it trained well enough to be able to recognize in the different types of the way the data may be presented or where it lives?
Well, that's where our actual approach comes in. From your question, sort of the assumption is that we use one model, which is trained on certain data set. It's not possible in our space because who will have access to so much PHI, right? Data with PHI. But we use a so-called hybrid approach, which leverages quite a few different things. that allows us to bypass this, by definition, lack of access necessarily to extensive volume of PHI data.
All
So,
right. Well, thank you.
yeah.
And so I also know that many healthcare and tech companies are strengthening their internal cybersecurity posture to match their product security. What are areas do you think are still most challenging when it comes to keeping your own business secure while scaling innovation?
Well, that's where it gets very interesting. So you're in security space, I'm in privacy space, right? They're sometimes mixed up, but they're, in everybody's mind, but they're very separate. So when security, you're responsible for making sure that nobody can penetrate the system or the data in transfer, right? Data at rest or data in transfer. What we are responsible for is creating tools that will allow, let's say, if I want to share data with you, I can choose what to share, right? So that's the very interesting conundrum which a lot of people ask, oh, privacy and security, what's the difference? But in terms of the challenges, I would say that, and that's something that we're seeing more and more, is this conversation that, let's say, it's within the same organization, right? So we're not even talking about outside actors. It's sometimes useful not for people to have access depending on their profession. So if somebody, let's say, is a treating physician, they should have access to all the data about the patient. The nurse will have most of the access to the patient's data, but somebody who's scheduler shouldn't, right? They don't need to see full exposure photographs of oncology patients. They just need to know the address and number that they should reach out, what they should use to reach out to them. And janitor should not even have any access to this data. This goes beyond even HIPAA. It's more of a question about, for example, sensitive data, like full nudity photographs. In certain countries, it's actually even mammography imaging, etc. And also, it allows to think about granular approach to what needs to be accessed and what's not. And one of the things which we are interested in, because it also requires separation of PHI and non-PHI data, so that you can control who has exposure to what.
I like that. It's very similar to the principle that we work with, called the along the lines of like least privileged access, basically
Precisely.
giving people
That's
the
exactly
minimum.
that.
Okay, perfect. But for those who don't understand, basically giving people the minimum amount of access they need in order to successfully do their job and nothing more.
Yeah. Let me give you another example. Like if somebody is a student, right? A lot of hospitals have students. They might need to have access to a lot of information, but not everything, because they don't need to know who the patient is, for example, etc. Right? They might have access to those photographs, but they, in a very limited manner. And that's a conversation that is starting right now. There are papers written on that. I had the opportunity to be a co-author of one of them, but it's something which goes beyond HIPAA, beyond regular conversation about security and privacy.
The insights. All right. At this point, that was mostly all the questions that I had for today, but I wanted to open the floor, see if there's anything I should like to add or any final thoughts to share.
Final thought, please think about security and privacy when it comes to your own data and the data of your patients.
All right. Well, Julia, once again, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your phenomenal insights because I know this is an area that is ever growing, and I know more and more organizations starting to take note, but I also know we still have a long way to go in this front as well.
And it will take a lot more work and conversation.
All
So
right.
thank you.